On average, food prices are up by 10%. Eggs are up by 39%. Flour is up by 35%. Milk is up 17%. Chicken is also up by 16%. Meat in general is up by 6.7%, and fruits and vegetables are up by 9.4%. All of our food prices were actually starting to rise before the war in Ukraine, despite what the propagandists at the White House try to say about the situation. Russia and Morocco have both put on heavy subsidies to help propel their fertilizer industries. As you know, these anti-competitive practices are a disaster for a global system based on fair and free trade. In response to this, our government decided to put tariffs on these products to help balance out the trade disparity that's caused by these subsidies. Overall, this means it increases the cost of fertilizer by $1.5 billion annually overall. This has been slowly making its way into our economy long before the current conflict, which is part of the reason food costs started to go up in the fall before the war. And the war in Ukraine has simply increased this a little bit more, with Russia being responsible for 14% of fertilizer production. This has been a major hurdle in making sure we keep the prices down. Because the cost of fertilizer makes up between 70 and 90% of the overall cost of agricultural production, those costs are passed along to the consumer because they're costs that the farmer incurs, and that's one of the major reasons why we've seen some of these increases in the prices of our food. We started to see these rises back as far as 2020 as a result of these tariffs, and the situation honestly would not have been that much better if there had not been a war in Ukraine. This is a situation that would have continued to get worse because of the other compounding effects that we're seeing across our economy. Energy costs are a perfect example of that. Energy costs are up 34% just within the past year. This increase in cost for energy production also makes its way into our supply chain, increasing the cost of delivering goods and also contributing to an increase in the cost of fertilizer. Fuel prices for farmers has also increased, and that translates into higher costs for any goods that were not affected by fertilizer. Not only have energy costs contributed to this dystopian future we're going into more quickly every day, but so have labor costs. 78% of restaurants have stated that increasing labor cost has been one of their biggest problems. Now, listening to these restaurants complain about the fact that they've been exploiting and underpaying their workers for a generation makes me not feel so bad about them having to increase their costs of their wages and maybe share a little bit of the profits, since they've been paying slave wages for a very long time in comparison to the value of what's produced by each individual worker. However, instead of making a little less profit, distributing it to the workers a little bit more effectively, they just decided to increase all their prices and then whine and cry about it. Listening to the CEO of McDonald's complain about having wage inflation by 10% being a major problem, it's hard for me to whine and cry with him when when we all know that was a job for teenagers, specifically because it gave them experience and the exploitive nature of the wages that were there. But when you have no experience, it's a great place to go. So this is carrying its way not just in restaurants, however, but in other parts of the economy where wages are having to go up in order to attract workers. When we combine the cost of fertilizer, when we combine energy costs, when we combine the rising labor costs, these are just three of actually several other factors that you may need to talk about on the campaign. As you're gearing up for 2024, this is going to continue to be a problem. There's no end in sight for the war in Ukraine, so that means 14% of the world's fertilizer is going to continue not to be available, along with the grains and other materials that they're responsible for. Russia is also a key exporter of nitrogen and phosphates that contribute to fertilizer and are obviously used by other industries, and this will continue to have a ripple effect throughout the economy. I'd say even if the war ended soon, it's still going to take a while to get these sanctions off, to get these products brought back to the market, which is why this is probably going to continue to be an issue for the 2024 election cycle. So if you're going to be in state legislative races, for example, in states that have off-year elections, like Virginia, for example, then this will be a pressing issue and good for you to continue to talk about. You just want to make sure you have a conversation with your farmers to find out What else we need to know about these issues? On average, the voter is going to only be interested in the basic talking point that Joe Biden's policies are bad and they have destroyed our economy. But there's going to be that segment of the voting population that's going to want real answers, and that's why it's so important for you to keep up with energy news, agricultural news, especially dealing with this fertilizer, and labor costs, because these are going to be things that people are going to be asking you about. And for those few voters that expect you to know what you're talking about, you want to make sure that you keep up on these issues. Keeping up with them and being able to talk about them in an intelligent way will also be valuable should you be sitting with a reporter and doing a news media interview. They will ask you questions that will require intelligent answers, and so don't get too used to using platitudes, typical conservative talking points on these issues in those kinds of situations. So these are things that you got to keep an eye on as you get ready to talk about the cost of food, the cost of groceries throughout the 24 election cycle.